The Brenner era is the period of time between Season 17 and Season 21. Many remember it as a renaissance period for the show, and that it is better than the era prior to it. I agree with this, and I feel this era parallels eras of my life, but aside from that, I think it's time to talk about each season and how I would rank them. This ranking is going to be a very controversial one, but it's my opinion, and if you don't agree with me,
That's too damn bad!
Let's begin with the season that everyone unanimously agrees is the weakest Brenner season, Season 17. It's easy to see why people would rank it as such, but I don't think it's the lowest of the bunch. Sure, it's on the lower end of my ranking too, but I don't dislike it, and I doubt anyone else does either. The only reason it sits where it is because the writing is simpler than in the likes of Season 20, but I would argue that that's why I think Season 17 is so underrated. I really like how the writers successfully managed to pull Thomas out of the cesspit he'd been stuck in for the previous 4 seasons, but were careful to not make the first season of this revival an utter masterpiece. Instead, we get a decent season that you can tell is a step up from Season 16. The episodes are simply good, with no episodes that I hate, but rather the occasional boring 3 strikes one. And even then, they still surprise us with amazing gems like Henry's Hero, that lets you know that the team are capable of great quality, but that they're saving it for when they go all out in future seasons. I love this, as we're given high expectations for this new era, while being reminded that the show still has far to go before it's perfect again. The 3 strikes formula is still used, but the stories have been stripped of characters that have less than 2 brain cells, or specials that consist of big-ass balloons on flatbeds. Whilst the scripting could have been more varied, the characters' dialogue is no longer dull and simplified, and they hark back to the classic era. The animation wasn't exactly the best, but it was more colourful than that of Nitrogen's, and again gave us hope for a more eye-catching look for the show. Another thing I love about Season 17 is how it takes underused characters from the Miller era like Luke, Flynn and Charlie, and gives them at least 1 episode each to make them more interesting, albeit they are rarely seen again after that. Harvey also got a lead role in Gone Fishing, and I personally think it's one of the season's best. On top of that, the returns of Duck, Bill and Ben were more than welcome, and their episodes are also a good watch. In summary, this season is good. Not to a point where I would call it a top 10 favourite, but enough to enjoy rewatching it, especially after the Miller era. Now let's move on to Season 18, one of the more popular Brenner seasons. What do I think? Season 18 is an improvement on Season 17, but I still think it's far from the best. That said, the writing is certainly better. The 3 strikes formula is almost completely abandoned, and we see some great character interactions, such as Thomas with Annie, Clarabelle and Edward, and Toad with James and Gator. The crew brought back Duncan, and his episodes are much better than the ones from the classic era, and giving Henrietta a face was a smart move. There are some very interesting story ideas involving emergency cables, VIPs and faulty lamps, heavily implying that the Miller era is in the rear-view mirror. The animation is very mixed if I'm being honest. On some occasions, it's some of the best animation I've ever seen, while there are other times when it's no better than the season prior. All that said, this season also has problems. There are duds that Season 17 didn't have. Emily Saves the World is very Miller or Bwaba-esque, and Timothy's episodes are proof that he's wasted potential. And even though the 3 strikes formula is mostly gone, that's not to say there aren't any boring episodes. There are also out of character moments for James, Toby, Diesel and the aforementioned Emily. But nevertheless, this season has some really excellent episodes in terms of both characters and concepts. Overall, you can see the Brenner era climbing higher and higher with its writing, but it still has some distance to cover. This season may have better successes than its predecessor, but even so, its best episodes are mostly 9 out of 10s for me. Don't get me wrong, Last Train for Christmas and Not So Slow Coaches are some of the best of the era, but they don't hold a candle to the highs of the 2 seasons I like more. Let's take a gander at Season 19, a season I have a lot to say about. Season 19 is a great season. I love it, and it's one of my top 10 seasons of the show. A lot of people might disagree with this take, as I've seen many place it at the bottom of their Brenner rankings. Yes, I agree that it's not perfect. Just like Season 18, there are out-of-character moments and bad dud episodes, and Sir Topham Hatt is presented as a joke. However, there is so much to like about Season 19. First, the animation is amazing, and possibly the best this show has ever had. There are even more interesting character dynamics just like in Season 18. Spencer and Henry is a fun one, as are Toby and Reg. Timothy and Porter are an interesting pair, and I think Philip's influence on the other characters works well too. Thomas and James's rivalry is back, and it's as fun as ever. Just like season 17, we see expansion to side characters that needed more screen time. The chemistry between Victor and Kevin and Den and Dart are revived for 2 fantastic episodes. Speaking of which, the episode quality varies a lot this season. While some episodes are really bad, there are some that are easily the best of CGI. Shall I name a few? Snow Place Like Home, Toad and the Whale, Slow Steven, Goodbye Fat Controller, Den and Dart, Two Wheels Good, there are more I could mention. This season has some really good humour as well. The Truth About Toby and Reds vs Blues are episodes that are so funny you shouldn't take them seriously. Again, this season isn't flawless. I don't like its slapstick all that much, and Thomas appeared more than he should have, but it's got a quality that the 2 seasons before it couldn't compare to, and I keep enjoying it every time I do a rewatch. Season 19 is like an amplified season 18. The best episodes are better, the worst episodes are worse, the animation is beautiful and the humour is hilarious. This season is my second favourite Brenner season. The gold medal, as I'm sure you've predicted, goes to season 20. Who doesn't love season 20? This is the season where Brenner and his writing colleagues found their footing. After 3 seasons, they finally knew what they were doing. Season 20 has so many good character moments, great callbacks to the classics, and many fantastic episodes. Remember Percy and Harold's rivalry that was forgotten about after season 6? It's back! Remember when Daisy insulted Annie and Clarabelle in season 2? There's a whole episode focusing on them. The returnees from Lost Treasure are used to their advantage too. Donald and Douglas get an episode, one of their best if I'm honest, and Skiff gets 2 whole episodes to himself, Blown Away being my favourite of the season. Daisy gets a lot of spotlight, and it works perfectly. The Arlesdale trio have their Railway series stories adapted, something that hasn't happened since season 4. I personally don't like their episodes though. There's nothing wrong with them, but they're not as good as the rest of the season for me. Just like the other Brenner seasons though, season 20 isn't without fault. There is still the occasional bad episode, and Hugo is kind of a weak character, even though his episodes aren't terrible. But these problems are very minuscule compared to the season's highlights. The animation is just as good as season 19's, and there are plenty of cool concepts, like Bradford the Brake Van for example, he's so fun. There's a lot of variety with the cast. Glyn gets restored, the Breakdown Cranes get an episode, and so does Sydney. This season is easily the best of the Brenner bunch. It doesn't exactly compare to any classic season, but I love it. Season 20 is peak CGI. Oh yeah, season 21 exists. For the last season of the era, season 21 is honestly quite a step down in quality. I understand that a lot of people will be annoyed with me as this season is one of the more popular ones, but I find it to be painfully overrated. I don't hate season 21, but I think it's really mid. The stories, I feel, become a bit more generic, characters aren't themselves, and there's a good bit of bouncing throughout, particularly in the cranky episodes. This season also has duds that are worse than any from the seasons prior to it. Remember what I said about season 17 and that it still used the 3 strikes formula but without any Miller problems? Well, season 21 is the opposite. Whilst the 3 strikes formula is rarely used, there are elements that are very reminiscent of the Nitrogen era. Let me give some examples. Harvey refusing help in Stuck in Gear, the Fat Controller not noticing his PA system doesn't work, and Terence crossing an obviously dangerous lake. That episode is so bad. There's also a lot of cartoony scenes present, such as Reg dancing in PA problems, and literally the entirety of Fastest Red Engine. Whereas season 17 was very simple but made enough effort to be good, season 21 kept trying to do so much but mostly failed and ended up becoming disappointing. I also think this season was more reliant on fan service than good writing. The writers brought back Terence, Bulgy and gave Big Mickey a face, but did nothing with them. It's hard to think of this season as a sort of finale when it keeps introducing new characters and trying to world build. Now, saying I hate this season is an overstatement. It's Shakespeare compared to the Miller and Bwaba eras, and if there's one thing I do like about the season, it's Emily. Seasons 18 and 19 did a poor job of handling her character, but this season began to bring her back to her original persona. Dowager Hat's Busy Day and Emily in the Middle portray her as a kind but firm voice of reason, who isn't afraid to tell others off when they're being stupid. While season 21 has its problems, it's nice to see this one character return to her former glory. Sadly, season 23 gave this the middle finger and brought Emily back to her regressed state. To cut a long story short, season 21 is mediocre. There aren't many great episodes, and the ones that are don't break the 8 out of 10 barrier. There are bad episodes that feel like they came from Bwoba, and the show has become a lot more cartoony. It isn't a terrible season, as it still has some of Brenner's quality still intact, but it pales in comparison to the other seasons on the list. That's my review of each Brenner season. For those who weren't bothered to watch the whole video, here's a quick summary. Season 20 is my favourite Brenner season, closely followed by 19. Season 18 is great, but not as good as the two following ones, and 17 is simply good but nothing amazing. Season 21 is the black sheep of the bunch, which isn't atrocious, but is an obvious transition from the good era to the bad. Overall, I like the Brenner era. It's great, very consistent, and has strong writing and visuals that expands upon Audrey's creation without insulting the source material. I do wish the show had ended at the Great Discovery, but these seasons are mostly proof that CGI Thomas isn't all bad. It has nothing on the classics, but neither does the early Hit era, another era that I enjoy. These seasons show that just because a series is for kids, doesn't mean the writers have to be lazy. Instead of using the same formula or abandoning realism altogether, adding to characters, having some fun, and above all being creative is what makes a good kids show, for both kids and adults. Each Brenner season does this the right and the wrong way, and as a result, it makes a good era.